What black market did kids at your school run? So I just heard this story from one of my father's employees, we'll call him Fitz. When Fitz was in 5th grade he sold cinnamon toothpicks that had soaked in cinnamon extract. He made a killing. This girl Karen wanted to get in on the action. She started selling the toothpicks too. Her older brother also had a toothpick business on the side. Karen's brother liked to sell toothpicks that have been soaked in LSD. You can see where I'm going with this. One morning Karen grabbed the wrong toothpicks and sold them to her 5th grade classmates. 5th graders. Tripping their balls off. Fitz told me everyone was sweating profusely, and a few children began to cry. Late into the day, local sheriff was called, and the whole thing fell on Fitz. 5th grade Fitz was like, fuck this, Karen's brother is a druggy weirdo and Karen sells toothpicks. The school settled with giving both student 2 weeks of in-school suspension. I don't know what happened to the brother. Edit. About to take off, I had to write this in a hurry. Hope I did his story justice. Comment. I'm just telling y'all what this guy told me, but if y'all wanna play Columbo, go right ahead. I've got better things to do. Marbles were big at my primary school. Real big. It got to the stage where they were only allowed for 3 months a year, as we would no longer discuss anything but the game we had other make we wanted to pay for. That was marble season. Now you could buy a big bag of cat's eyes from the supermarket, but they wouldn't get you far. To play the high stakes games, you needed a spect egg, a glitter bomb, a tidal wave or something exotic, but those suckers were pricey. Us poor kids couldn't afford those things, so we secretly gambled our marbles through the year, so when marble season opened, we had amassed enough marbles to really be ahead of the game. Being caught with marbles outside of marble season was bad. Real bad. One kid got 5 strokes of the cane. This being so, it was a big risk to hide in the shadows of the trees and sling those little glass balls about. Not only did it hone your skills for the season start, but you got good at taking the shot and then acting nonchalant. Marbles were currency. You could trade lunches with them or buy time on playground equipment. There was a good reason they banned marbles at my school. We turned it into some sort of Mayfair sheet. I ran it for a few spare years in elementary. Books got banned in the classroom. Not blacklisted books, but literally books in general. They were far too distracting, even though most kids read when done with work, etc. I started smuggling books to school and peddling them out to kids. It started out innocently. I had loads of Hank the Cowdog books that I was super into, and I hid them in my desk, and I loaned them to close friends when asked. But soon, the entire class knew, and that spread to the school. I became a full-time book smuggler. I had a system where there was a 2-week borrowing limit, kept a log of who/what book/when, ran a teensy little library for myself, basically, and I made sure these kids were treating the books fairly. If anything came back damaged, they were banned from borrowing. Kept this up until middle school, which was considerably less totalitarian. Edits. Spelling. Sorry. Mobile. Edit 2. Thank you for the silver and gold. Holy crow. I'm about to hop off, but I'm glad some people got a genuine smile out of this. It's probably the only really interesting thing I've ever done, so this made my whole day. I hope everyone has a lovely one. So this was me too. I forget when I started. 5th grade? 8th grade? I know I was doing it as a 10th grader. We lived in a small farming community, but my dad worked a couple hours away in the city. He'd stop at Sam's and buy me a box or two. I sold them for 25 cents each or 5 for $1. It got to the point where I could sell easily 50 per day. I had regulars who I would save certain flavors for and everything. You could order for the next day even. I ended up and got caught by the bus driver as a 10th grader near the end of the school year, I think. But I don't remember exactly. She must have made a stink about it to the school, because 5th period came right after lunch, and an announcement came across the PA system. I don't remember the exact words, but it was something like, it has come to our attention that there are students who are involved in economic activity at school. This is not allowed. Students are only authorized to sell things officially offered by school clubs, teams, etc. I was in the midst of selling right then. The teacher in 5th period was really cool, and as long as I was done by the time he started his lectures, he didn't mind. He was one of those teachers who was cool like that, but he also had his serious side. So, afterwards, he let me quickly finish, then said never again. The entire school, at least the students, knew who was being called out. That was the end of that point. Before you ask, no, I don't remember how much I bought them for exactly. However, I remember paying like $5 per box at the start, perhaps up to $6.50 or so by the end. During elementary school in the 80s, many candies weren't individually wrapped for SA in stores, think Warheads etc. I bought bulk packs of candy, didn't matter what kind, although atomic fireballs were my cash cow. I individually packed them, or maybe a couple to a pack depending on the candy. I use those tiny Ziplocs you see people use for drugs. Being around adults a little devoid of scruples, I was able to get those in bulk from a local head shop called High on the Hill. It was a surreal time looking back. I was the only supplier for a year solid in 4th grade. I made so much bank for a 10-year-old it was insane. I would make $100 a week just off of atomic fireballs. The bulk jugs were about $5 or $6 each wholesale, and at a quarter each it worked out to about $60 a jug profit, if I recall. Luckily school came easy to me, because it was a full-time job keeping stock, packaging product, counting piles of change, budgeting, keeping a bank register. Mom got a separate account that I used for my money, dodging the man etc. It was turbulent as I never really had a group of friends as a kid, but in the 4th grade I was the faking man. Going from having no real good friends and having my time divided by either being picked on or ignored, to becoming the belle of the ball was surreal. Even at that time I was able to realize what was going on. Their smiles were all fake, their interest was not in me, but rather what was in my bag any given day. Girls were not saying hello because they were being polite or even the least bit interested in talking to me. They were just waiting their turn for their fix. That denim bag got more attention than I ever dreamed of. I was just along for the ride. I had laid the groundwork and provided the blueprint. When the 5th grade started there was competition, but they were weak. They would always sell out or only buy enough to make a few bucks here and there, largely selling lollipops or pre-packed stuff. Hershey's Kisses, Bito Honey or Tootsie Rolls, whatever they could grab at the store before school. It was amateur hour. They had made a mockery of something I took seriously as a 10-over-11-year-old can take something. I closed up shop pretty quickly after the school year began. The fast life and fast money was over. The excitement wasn't there, the smiles weren't as big. Kids came to me as a last resort. They bought the popular kids completely out before looking my way. It was like flipping a switch. My first day without the bag I had a few kids ask if I was holding, but once word got around that I was out of the game everything went back to normal. No friends, no conversation, no one to sit with at lunch or on the bus, no one interested, fake or otherwise. It's the first time I had ever really witnessed the dynamic of being disingenuine. I had always been authentic, and after it was all over, I was happy to stay that way. I've never really recounted this time into words. As it turns out, I learned a lot of life lessons in the 4th grade. TLDR, I peaked in 4th grade. I was a Pokemon card smuggler in 6th grade. My friend's dad overheard my friend and I talking about how much our Pokemon cards were worth. He was shocked to learn some were worth $10 to $20 a piece. He made the comment, shame they won't be worth that much when you go to sell them. That comment stuck with me, and a few days later I started selling my cards at school. I made a list of everything I had with prices next to them. I'd pass the list around during class and kids would meet up with me between classes to buy what they wanted. I was making crazy amounts of money for a middle schooler, and before long parents were complaining that their kids were skipping lunch because they were spending their lunch money on Pokemon cards, so the school banned them. But I still had a good bit of inventory to move. I did all kinds of things to avoid getting caught. I hid cards in a box of crayons. I put a few sheets of sleeves in the middle of a binder full of legit notes. I even hollowed out an old textbook to hide all my cards. Despite getting searched 3 to 5 times over the next few weeks, my cards were never found, and I was able to sell all of them before Christmas break. I ended up making close to $800 and was able to buy my entire immediate and extended family Christmas gifts with my own money for the first time. Once all the other kids learned how much money I had made, they were blown away and suddenly everyone was selling their cards. Problem was, no one was buying them anymore. TLDR, I started a 1 kid per Cayman card black market, smuggling them into school, and got out of the game right before the bubble burst. I was the dirty magazine dealer when I was in middle school in the 80s. First I found my parents' born stash. Boxes and boxes and boxes stashed. Basement boxes by the washing machine and under the Civil War swords. Guest bedroom under the bed. At least 50. Standing cabinet in the kitchen. Cabinets near the ceiling. All over their bedroom. Under the china. We were riddled with it. Yeah, I went through my parents' bedroom. There were hundreds of porno mags in the house, and I was 11. Only God and my parents knew what was in there, and I had to find out. After I had gotten bored of some, I started selling them to other kids $20 each in 1984 money. The titty magazine market was booming, selling to other adolescents. I had a client base and had to get more. I'd go into a bookstore and ask for the most esoteric book that I could imagine. The clerk would go check in the back, and I'd stuff all the Penthouse/Playboy mags in my bag and book it. Maybe a comic book too. Treat yourself. Many years later I returned to my hometown and went to that bookstore. I wanted to apologize and try to make up for it somehow. It was gone. Sorry about that, Walden Books. We were boys, and you had boobs. Myself and 3 other friends, all Asian, sold those Asian jelly straws, something non-Asian kids are unfamiliar with, but were in love with when discovered. Caramel apple pops and Mexican lollipops, large Latin community, and saw the opportunity to make more money. Covered in tajin in middle school. Each straw was 25 cents, 5 for $1, and pops would go for 75 cents to $1 depending on the demand. We would each have a jar of the jelly straws in our own locker, a bag of pops and a small box of quarters and cash. Every period, we would restock our backpack and sell while walking to and from class, and in our class period. It was great. As a middle schooler, $20, split between 4 of us, $5 per kid, a day was the equivalent of making 6 figures now in adult life. Life was great. Until one day my friend's locker got broken into. Someone had watched over his shoulder when he put his locker combination in and came back later. They took all the snacks, all the cash, about $100 worth, and everything else in the trash. School eventually banned the jelly straws, but not the pops. Large Latin community still brought their own to eat as snacks and made students who got caught reselling snacks get suspended. My 3 friends and I were content back then. We had made roughly $2,000 from our classmates and still got to eat the Asian straws at home. Now I work 40+ hour weeks to pay rent and eat fast food. Growing up sucks. We created an entire black market currency and economy based on rocks. Story below. I used to manage one of 3 mining operations that were running concurrently on the elementary school playground back in the mid to late 90s. This school was located in a small town in southeast Tennessee, rural and bordered by the Cherokee National Forest. The shinier or smoother the rock, the more valuable it could be. Rocks were traded between kids and their peers for snacks, drinks, homework, bribes, even protection from bullies. Whoever controlled the rocks controlled the playground. My operation had the largest kids using the biggest boulders that were chipped into rounded points to break up the largest rocks down to manageable size for a bunch of little kids, and we had the most hands with sticks and straight edged rocks for digging and dirt displacement. At the end of a day of work, we would place a huge rock on top of our mining hole, too big for most anyone to lift, besides a select few guys that all worked for me. Of course, I'm sure any of the 4th, 5th, or 6th graders could have, at the time, had a cared too. 2 other operations existed. One that was made up of all girls, though their rock output was shabby at best, and another group that did their work inside of the dome-shaped jungle gym, providing the most protection from intruders and thieves, while also providing line-of-sight obstruction to the teachers and others. As a manager, I would walk the edge of the playground looking for strong sticks and perfect digging rocks, because the durability of sticks and pieces of chipped rock required a pretty steady supply of unbroken tools to work with. Point on the occasion that the classes had recess at different times, a lot of thievery and sabotage would happen. Rocks would get stolen, and mining holes would get filled with trash and debris. I recently visited the old school, which was closed in the mid-2000s, and is now abandoned, and has fallen into disrepair. The hole though, it's still there. All this time still hasn't fixed the impact my class and others had on that old playground. Point that's about all I can remember from the experience, but I do still have my own personal collection of rocks from that playground that I took home bit by bit over many years in elementary school. Point a box full of stupidity and imagination. Salt. And I ran it. Point I was one of the few kids who brought my own lunch to school because we couldn't afford to pay for school lunches and my mom was too proud to sign up for a reduced price lunch. Given the state of cafeteria food, I really didn't mind too much. Point one time I brought some hard-boiled eggs to school, probably right after Easter. Of course I brought salt to put on them, but I brought way too much, because what 6th grader knows how much salt she'll need? A couple of friends asked for some of my salt, because the soup from the cafeteria was so bland, and I gave them some. That brought down the wrath of the teachers upon our heads, because we were destroying the delicate nutritional balance of their bland ass soup, and salt was banned from the cafeteria. But since I was bringing my own lunches I found ways to sneak salt in, and eventually I had a whole black market for salt like this was freaking 1st century Rome or something. Salt packets from fast food places were especially convenient, though you had to hide the evidence. Point I hated that school so much. It was a relief to transfer to the new charter school the next year. Suddenly I wasn't constantly in trouble for things like getting bullied. I actually learned things. Amazing. I used to be an instant noodle dealer in 5th grade. Our school would charge unbelievable amounts for their snacks and people got hungry on really late days. So I would buy like 40 packs $4 $18 and sell them for $1 each. The school had a cafeteria with water boilers, so you had everything you needed to make some. Now, why didn't others go and buy where I bought them? Well, because the amount of homework we had was outrageous. About 2 paperworks each week and an assignment of some sort every damn week. But to the unlucky kids who didn't have so much cash to constantly buy noodles, they instead did parts of my homework. The school caught on pretty fast and put up posters that if anyone could catch the noodle dealer they would be rewarded. I think it was because all the paper trash from my wrappers sometimes ended up on the floor instead of in a trash can. So, knowing this, my clever young self carved out a couple books, like you see in movies. They were all from Diary of a Whimsy Kid Go Longer novels. And I would hide the pack in there and pass it saying, "Have you read past chapter 5 yet? The story gets a lot more interesting, and you do have to read this book." The teachers thought that I had a massive book pile at home and brought books for people to read, so I was among a favorite in some classes. And after they had eaten the pack the next day they'd put a $1 bill in the book and hand it back. I made such a profit from this, so it was okay if someone never paid. I'd just freeze them out, excommunicado. Okay, I've been waiting for this. One point my buddy Adam arrives at school, pulling me and Rasmus aside to tell us about a show he watched last night about some guy who traded his way to a few houses, cars and a lot of money. Apparently he just started off with a needle or some sheet. Point we were down. The 3 of us, all 11 to 12 years old, picked up a needle from class and spent 3 whole goddamn days trading it. Nobody needed it until this guy from a grade above us got a splinter while playing soccer inside. We gave him the needle. He gave us a handful of sour cream and onion chips. Those were popular, so we actually got a full mini chocolate milk for those. On it went, until someone actually traded money for some shit I forgot what was. With that money we bought bread and milk, and sold it to some kids for more than it cost us. By the end of the second week, we had 50 kr. So we went to the local grocer, and bought this amazing package of 1 kr candy bags, super tiny ones. They sold 90 of those for 50 kr. We faking ran back to school, and every recess we would fill our pockets with these, our pants falling down all the time with the weight, and sell to kids for their lunch money. They usually cost 1 kr a piece, so we made 40 kr in one day. Next day we did the same. And the day after that we had enough money for 180 of the small bags. I remember this is where our sales slowed. Some kids got in trouble for eating candy instead of food. Also, we had way too much product to move. Then this kid bought 20 in one deal. I will never forget you, man, and said he heard the kids in the classes in the basement was talking about us and wanted to try the goods. So we went down there. And I shit you not guys, about 60 to 70 kids at the height of my chest were faking raving all around us, yelling back quote there they are, and grabbing at us to get the good bags first. We used to sell 90 bags in a good day. That day we sold 180 bags in 15 minutes or less. This left us with 210 kr, enough to buy 4 packages. We sold those in less than a day. Then we were at 330 kr, a considerable amount of money we felt. So we bumped the business up a notch. Adam convinced his parents to drive him to Germany's border, where candy and stuff are less taxes, to buy Coca-Cola cans. We had planned out the perfect spot to sell them, behind the toilet building on the main playground at school. We would have made 150% plus profit per day, we figured. It was a matter of time before we would be rich, and we were already legends at school. The next day a teacher shut us down with some bullshit reasoning about health regulations or some shit. I never stopped hating her. It is the greatest memory of an otherwise damn boring school. Rasmus, Adam and I. My time to shine. Allow me, Reddit, if you'll indulge me, to share a story of how a few kids trying to make an honest quid turned into gang warfare in my school. For context, I live in the UK in one of the few areas that have grammar schools, academic schools for people that pass IQ tests at a young age. Starting our year 10th, age 14 over 15, a couple us got a wise idea. Because of food laws in the UK, schools couldn't sell any junk food. Instead you only got healthy options like these utterly loathsome cookies that tasted like baked powdered milk. So we could go to the nearby Quality Save, a shop that sold faulty or near sell by stock super cheap. A pack of cookies that usually cost £1 cost 33 pence here. A bottle of drink that was £1 and 50 pence sold for 50 pence. It quietly started with one kid in my class, we'll call him Dan. I quickly followed. Being from a poorer family and needing money, I saw an opportunity. Dan was just starting out when I followed suit. At first he didn't take too kindly to me stepping on his turf. He got some of his friends to break into my locker because he knew I couldn't snitch about selling shit in the school illegally. Eventually I struck a deal with him and pleaded to his conscience. We were both stoners from piss poor families and I needed him to know I was trying to make a buck to actually have money to buy some shit for myself, and we could cut a deal where I'd buy different products from him. He had cookies, Pepsi and certain kinds of drinks. I had biscuits, Coke and other types of crisps. He accepted on the condition he had first dibs in our class, and I accepted. Better than getting my shit grabbed. For a good year business was moving. The teachers knew someone was selling shit, but couldn't find who. Everyone who bought from us knew if they snitched they wouldn't get the junk food. And the money, holy shit, the money. Guys, I was making more illegally selling junk food than I was earning in my first job. I was pulling in around £400-500 a week. Dan was doing anywhere between 700 to 900. Bigger locker. Ended up getting a few year 7s, entry years, to work for him. I stayed solo. Unfortunately, Dan couldn't keep his mouth shut about the money he was making, and about a quarter of the way through year 11th, we found a kid selling in the year below. Dan made his threats, as did I. We didn't need more competition, but the kid persisted, so Dan got his dudes. Dan and his mates were all the chaps. Yes, even a grammar school had chaps. Smart chaps in fact. And after school he broke into the kid's locker, stole his goods, and left a note telling him to watch out. Well, the kid didn't take heed. Instead he got his own friends in his own year to help stash his goods and protect them. We figured out what he was doing. If we broke into his friends' lockers they could report us, because as far as they were concerned, they were just holding on some stuff for their mate, who we'll refer to as Flapjack from now on. As we were in the middle of dealing with Flapjack, we learned another kid, year 8, 12 years old, started his own selling ring. Things were starting to blow up out of proportion and I knew the writing was on the wall. I quietly pulled out of selling junk food and retired, watching the mess of the next few weeks. The floodgates had been opened. Once one kid showed he wasn't scared of Dan, then they all knew they didn't have to be scared of him. The number of sellers skyrocketed, but our smart chav was not gonna have any of it. £900 is a lot of faking money per week for anyone. For a teenager it's huge. It all started when I went to go buy a Sprite from Flapjack. Dan didn't sell them, and I'd find his class at lunch. Couple of the girls in the class tell me he's not in, but his friend might be selling in the quad. Alright, I find his mate and he just gives it to me, free of charge. Turns out someone, Dan's goons, jumped Flapjack the night before, and he was beat up bad. His mate saw the writing on the wall and wanted to get rid of his stock, but he warned me some of Flapjack's other mates were gunning for revenge. Well, Dan being the loudmouth that he was, it pretty quickly became rumor he ordered the jump of Flap. Lo and behold, at the end of the week Dan got jumped and his money stolen. Shit was quickly blowing up out of control. The teachers started raising the alarm that kids were coming in beaten black and blue, but wouldn't admit to why. Our head pretty quickly put 2 and 2 together and declared anyone caught illegally selling junk food would be given a straight expulsion. The stakes were higher than ever, but this did not deter Dan and Flapjack. Every day there were raids in each other's common rooms, stealing of goods, skirmishes between their respective goons in the hallways. People in both classes were getting a bit weary that kids from another class they didn't know would sneak into their room and steal sheet. It all came to a head when Dan laid a trap. He got a baby monitor and stuck it in his locker and sat in the classroom next door with his goons. To confess, my part 1 became a prefect and was in charge of the hall the classrooms were on. I decided to turn a blind eye. After all, I was Dan's man and informant. Flapjack and his 2 goons walked into our form, and not a moment later Dan stormed in with 4 lads from our year. I saw a chair thrown. I saw one kid get thrown into the wall. Another slammed against the door, and none of it sounded pretty. At this point I decided I really needed the toilet, because I knew nothing good would come of this. At the end of lunch, Dan had a black eye. Some of his goods had torn shirts, and it was obvious they'd been in a fight. We were told our last lesson was delayed as our head wanted to speak to us. He burst through our door like a raging erection, and I knew at that point someone was gonna get faked. He pointed at me and said, "You, my office, now," and asked me what I saw. I feigned innocence and said nothing out the ordinary today. Spent the first 15 minutes on watch, went to grab lunch precisely when the attack happened, came back at the last 15 minutes. Our head wasn't happy with my answer, but couldn't do nothing, since I ain't no snitch. He ended up going to every form and opening all the lockers. Everyone caught with a large number of junk foods were to report to his office. A fake Dan and Flap got suspended for a few weeks. No one actually got expelled, but everyone was warned anyone caught doing it again would get kicked out. Dan started again 4 months before the end of year and would go on to become a drug dealer. TLDR. Kids trying to make an honest living at school quickly descends to gangs of new English school madness and people get hurt. Our school had lots of horse chestnut trees. Lots. To the extent of, in September, when conkers started falling from trees, the school gave students incentives to pick up fallen nuts as they littered every outdoor area of the school grounds. You could trade in a bin bag full of conkers for a plastic bag full of sweets. This was never a really big deal for me, but it was clearly huge for other kids. Every morning break, hundreds of students would hit the playground and collect as many conkers as they could. This definitely helped clear up the school, but it created some problems. Students would form mafia type groups and promise to split the loot once they gave in their bag full of conkers. As lots of students were interested in getting a literal bucket load of sweets, conkers disappeared pretty fast. Kids did bring in conkers from elsewhere, but this didn't seem to be enough. Fights started breaking out in the playground. Then something very interesting started happening. As the supply of conkers dwindled, kids started arriving at school with old toys, games, accessories, etc. to sell for conkers. Conkers were now a currency, a legitimate currency that you could buy faking marbles, cool stationery, and even Game Boy games with. I'm not kidding. Some kids were so desperate for their sweet loot that they were prepared to sell anything. They no longer were particularly attached to point. When I found out about this, I started to get interested. That's when the horse chestnut tree at the front of my garden became my literal money tree. Every few days in autumn, I'd pick up as many conkers as I could, and I'd lug them to school with me. I realized that compared to some people, having conkers was a big deal. The value they placed on items was ridiculous. A hairbrush for 10 conkers, a video game for 30 conkers. I mean, come on, this stuff was so cheap I almost felt bad. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I may have collapsed the conker economy of my school, as I ended up buying tons of stuff each day, which meant prices rose, which meant kids couldn't afford to buy and sell stuff properly with conkers, which led to kids getting very upset and telling the principal. Once the school caught on to what was happening, the fights, the conker economy, people selling their parents' precious items for conkers, they shut it down. Looking back, I'm surprised it took them so long to actually get worried about it. No sweets, but conkers still stayed around. People enjoyed collecting them, even if they no longer had any material value. TLDR, helped destroy my school playground's economy with a lot of conkers. I'm pretty sure this was the 3rd or 4th grade. T.DL.R. I sold anti-bullying weapons and propaganda. I was really stupid. I used to come inside at recess and steal all the blackboard chalk. I ground it up into dust and divided it into balloons. I had no friends. When snipped open and thrown at something, a huge cloud of chalk dust would be released into the air. I sold these to kids as bully repellents for 50 cents or ice cream or pop or something of relatively equal cost. It depended on the kid. There was one kid who I think had autism maybe, but he wasn't identified. My dad did daycare for teens with autism, so I was around that a lot, and he got made fun of, pushed and hit constantly. I made a ton of them for him for free. Bullying was a problem at my school, but I was more of a physical fighter than some kids my age. Plus people avoided me because I was the weird kid who was always alone, so I wanted to find a way to help other kids get rid of their bullies in a way that wasn't exactly physically violent, but was just more of a hilarious and effective way of publicly shaming that person as a bully. Because if a person came inside from recess, covered in chalk dust, it meant that they are bullying a kid in my grade and they would be made fun of for a day for being in his hole covered in chalk. Unfortunately, the teachers began rallying together to figure out who the mysterious chalk thief was and why kids were coming inside covered in colorful dust and called bullies by their peers, so they started waiting in classrooms to see who came in during recess. I got caught by my own teacher who was pissed, but asked me what I was doing. I told her the truth, and she said, if I stop now she won't breathe a word to anybody, not even my parents. I stopped and she didn't tell anyone, but then the teachers got hardcore about bullying on the playground and I like to think I caused it. So I sold anti-bullying propaganda and weapons on the school's black market. Edit. I wasn't really interested in the economic aspects of this. I was stealing it, so I got it for free. I occasionally got a free ice cream or soda, and I was just straight up bored and very antisocial. A teacher of over a decade here, the worst I'd ever seen, was in my 4th year of teaching. A boy decided he would head to a local Golden Chick at closing and buy all their leftover chicken strips. He would put these in his backpack. His whole backpack, each pocket of it, would be filled with chicken. He would bring the bag to school the next day and sell at a profit. Kid was not refrigerating his bag, just leaving it sitting out overnight. Kid was not cleaning his bag. Kid was also not always moving all of his inventory in one day sometimes, so would keep it in the bag. His backpack started smelling rancid shortly after this started. I started warning my students, don't buy the fried chicken. Don't eat it. It's a trap. After about 2.5 weeks a massive bout of food poisoning went through the school. The day it hit was like the movie Airplane. Ended up combining classes with 2 other teachers, so I could monitor the boys' bathroom and another teacher could monitor the girls' bathroom. I had classes of 30 to 35 knocked down to between 5 to 10 for about a week. Kids came back after a few days. Most were a little sheepish. Kid was still selling. My message was still the same. Don't eat the fried chicken. About a week later, half of my students were knocked out with food poisoning again. Free lunch tickets for 50 cents. When I was in 2nd grade, my elementary school used red tickets, the ones that look like raffle tickets, for the kids who qualified for free lunches. The yellow tickets were $0.75 and the green tickets were full price at $1.25. Kids' parents would give them the money for lunch for the week on Mondays and they would buy the tickets for the week. Some kids would bring the money for a full month and be given however many tickets they paid for. Every day you handed the lady at the door of the cafeteria a ticket or showed her your homemade bag lunch and then went in to eat. In the school office they kept the rolls of tickets on the principal's desk. I was bullied a lot, getting beaten up by the older kids, once stabbed in the leg with a pencil, which I have a scar from, and ended up in there often, basically whenever I would go to a teacher and ask for help. No clue why I would get in trouble, but whatever, it's just how it was. One day, after I went in, because the same kids had torn up my ticket and told me I was already fat enough, so I shouldn't eat more, I decided to recoup my loss and steal a ticket from the roll on the principal's desk. I was pretty salty because I was one of the kids who brought a bag lunch every day and I was finally able to get lunch from the cafeteria. I didn't get caught for taking the ticket, and that's when it occurred to me that the rich kids were buying their lunch for $1.25 day and would probably pay me to be able to keep some of the money if I stole more tickets and sold them for less than their lunches usually cost. So the next time I was in the principal's office the roll of red tickets was sitting on his desk. I pulled off a ton and stashed them in my backpack. I told a couple of kids in my class who were complaining about not getting an allowance that week about the tickets and offered to sell them at 50 cents each, basically allowing them to pocket the extra cash their parents had given them. This became the usual for me for maybe 6 months. The extra money was nice, but the best part was that for those months literally everyone was being nice to me, even the kids who usually bullied me. I was eventually caught because even though the lady in the cafeteria didn't really pay attention, one of the very rich kids used a red ticket and she told someone and he told them what I was doing. Amazingly I didn't get kicked out of the school, only suspended for ages because my dad spun it in a way that celebrated my thinking like an entrepreneur. I still had my ass beat when I got home though. Edit, spacing. Sorry, on mobile.